Hello, 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 everyone. Welcome back to Malorie's Weird World Adventures, the podcast. I'm your host, Malorie, and I'm here to show you just how weird this world of ours really is. I'm very excited today to have Kayla Branstetter on with me, who wrote the book, Don't Be an Athena. So we'd love to hear from you, I guess, your description of the book and how it came to be.
Okay, so the title was originally going to be Choices because I wanted to show women all the different choices that they had available to them or the different choices that women made for themselves. And it's this situation of when life presents you with two bad choices and you have to make the best of the two worst choices that life have given you. And that was kind of my mindset. But I was doing research, and then I did my first TED Talk called Don't Be an Athena, and I went ahead and streamlined it because the message of my TED Talk was inspired by my message of my book, and I just used that legend as this large metaphor into 21st century women to highlight that women have been through sexism and this medical gaslighting and misogyny literally for thousands of years. So if people don't know, the origin of Medusa begins with Athena. And when Medusa was, there are a couple origin stories, but of them, she was the only mortal sister of the Gorgons. And she was strikingly beautiful. And she decided to priestess to Athena. And it didn't know which legend. My book is following the Roman poet Ovid's origin story of her, and it's Poseidon became captivated by her. So you have this man or this god of immense power, and he takes advantage of Medusa in Athena's holy temple. And then Athena, instead of holding Poseidon accountable for his crimes against Medusa, she transforms Medusa into this gorgon and monster and makes her hideous. And I just think of 21st century women and doing other women in society tries to hold victims accountable and that was completely out of their control and not hold these powerful deities and these powerful men accountable for their crimes. And so I layered that into I talk about sexual assault in my book. I talk about domestic violence, but I also included reproductive health and our reproductive choices. So that's the behind my book. My own infertility and my own miscarriage and the fact that I'm a daughter of a teen mom just impacted this storyline that I wanted to create a platform for women to share their stories. And I wanted to create a book where women had a book to go to as this source of survival and a source of visibility. That was important to me.
I love that. That's so admirable. And I feel like there's such a taboo talking about fertility and in obviously sexual assault, but even something as simple as fertility, which you think should be like a positive experience, something that you're working towards. Because my husband just went through IVF and it's no one talks about it, and everyone's weird when you talk about it, and people don't know how to respond. And I feel like you're put in society to believe that something must be wrong with you if you can't just have it, right? So you have to go through a process to help with that. So it's lovely to see you kind of normalizing those conversations.
Absolutely. And I interviewed a woman who had undergone IVF, and I interviewed a woman who froze her eggs and gave birth at 44. And I interviewed a woman who was a surrogate. And I remember interviewing the woman who had undergone IVF, and she just told me like the whole process just seemed so dehumanizing and cold and clinical. And like, that was eye-opening to me because I did go through infertility and I had gone through some procedures, but I was able to conceive without the use of IVF, and I'm so blessed. But it was isolating when you do go through infertility. The amount of people who feel entitled to share their opinions going through something so I'm trying to think of a word for it. It's so difficult, just so heartbreaking because there's a
Mhm.
grief attached to infertility that I think people don't understand because there's this, you're in denial that you're going through it, you're angry that you have to go through it,
Mhm.
and it's just circuitous of those emotions.
Definitely, and I feel the grief is a great word because every month you are negative, you get that negative pregnancy test.
Yes,
There's a grieving because you wish, you hope that it could have been the opposite, and it's like a loss that a lot of people don't understand. Um,
absolutely.
the book tackles what you call the myth of silent endurance. Where does that cultural script come from, and how does it get reinforced specifically inside the doctor's office?
I think this goes from centuries of a patriarchal society and putting
Mhm.
unrealistic expectations on women, coupled with the healthcare system, and not just the healthcare system, I'm just going to say science in general, not including women in
Mhm.
research.
Mhm.
For
Mhm.
centuries, we have viewed women's bodies through the lens of a man's body because it's been
Right.
men for centuries who have been able to attend medical school. And even before we institutionalized medicine, it was women who were the midwives delivering babies. And then
Right.
we institutionalized medicine, and all of a sudden it's men treating women and delivering babies who don't understand the body. And how many
Mhm.
centuries did we go through where they thought a woman's uterus floated around her body? If you read Shakespeare and even the plays back in that time period, they thought a woman's uterus floated, and that's emotional. And the cure to it was pregnancy. Surprise,
Mhm.
surprise. And then hysteria was a diagnosis what into the 1950s in the United States. And it wasn't until
Mhm.
the early 1990s we decided to start researching women's bodies. I think only a couple years ago they've started using actual blood hysteria products. And I know in my state, it wasn't only until recent that they removed a luxury tax on women's period products. So if we think about, we've just had this expectation that women are just going to have to endure and just endure pain, both physical and emotional. But on top of that, if you have infertility, I felt like, well, it's your fault. It's automatically the woman's fault. And that's how I felt when I was going through it. And it just translates into the medical field of just centuries of women not having a seat at the table when it comes to research of
Mhm.
our bodies.
Right. Which is crazy. And even with this is so I'm pregnant now. We if IVF was successful, I'm pregnant now.
Congratulations!
Thank
Yay!
you. And it's such a strange experience because especially with men, they don't understand it. So it's
Mhm.
like it makes them so uncomfortable, and it's almost like you're completely ill. Like we've always treated pregnant women, like are you ill? There's something wrong with you. You're fragile. When you can really mostly go about your daily life and everything's fine. But it's interesting just the stigma that comes with it, and the fact that we used to be, I mean, we're just now kind of celebrating our bodies when we're pregnant. Women hid it for centuries. I mean, hid the fact that they're pregnant. And just now are we like wearing things that make us look cute when we're pregnant?
Oh, and the maternity shoots. I did a maternity photo shoot with both of my pregnancies because it's when you struggle with infertility and you're finally pregnant,
Yeah.
you want to show off that you're pregnant.
Hmm.
But I also know with infertility, I don't know if you had gone through this. I had such anxiety with both my pregnancies
Hmm.
the entire time because they told me I was going to lose my first child. I had a
Wow.
miscarriage.
Hmm.
And then with my third pregnancy, I was fine, but I was sick the entire 9 months. So even though as happy as I was to be pregnant, I felt like I just could not enjoy being pregnant.
Hmm. There's always the
What
next
if?
milestone, I'll feel better. The
Yes.
next milestone, I'll feel better. And I feel I was so afraid it wasn't going to keep, but there was going to be an issue because we'd had a miscarriage as well, just very early on in our IVF
Mhm.
process. And I was so worried about it. through the first, several months. And then you kind of get to do the ultrasound process. You graduate from the fertility clinic, you see it, it becomes more real. And it's always, well, then I'll feel better than during the next phase. And I just got to the part where I can feel him moving now. So that's helped me at least know, well, I
Yes.
know he's good down there because he's moving.
Yes. Yes.
Mhm.
And I'm not only am I a big advocate for reproductive health, I'm big for taking care of born. I think we don't have enough advocacy on what's for the baby is taking care of mom. And we need more
Mhm.
support in that area as well with postpartum and giving mothers the grace to heal their bodies.
Right.
And yeah,
So you've talked a lot too about women being told their pain isn't real. What's the most
yes.
surprising moment you've had from interviews or experiences you've collected, or are there a few that just really stood out to you?
Even in my own experience, I remember infertility, my first doctor's appointment was we weren't trying hard enough to get pregnant. So that felt so dismissed. I know that's not really pain, but it's like this emotional pain of you are trying for 8 months and you're not being successful. And then you encounter a practitioner or a provider who is saying, well, you're not trying hard enough, come back in a few months. And it just made me feel like any type of doctor, because obviously there was an issue. I had a hormone issue with progesterone. And
Mhm.
after I had my second daughter, because with my first daughter, they I ended up having like a stage 2 tear, and they were
Mhm.
able to give me naproxen to help with the inflammation. And so with my second daughter, it was like the easiest labor and delivery. I would give birth again before being pregnant if it was just like that one. It was just so
Right.
simple. But there was still a little bit of pain. And so I asked for naproxen, which is like prescription ibuprofen. It's not a controlled substance. It's not a
Mhm.
painkiller. And
Right.
my regular doctor was off her rounds. And so it was a male doctor who was checking on me. And he's the one that they massage your uterus after you have a baby. And I asked for naproxen and he goes, "You're fine." Completely dismissed, like
Wow.
he's never experienced childbirth. And I'm over here thinking, well, shoot, hand me my purse. I'll just give you my own extra strength Tylenol. I'll take care of myself. But it wasn't
Wow.
just that. Yeah, yeah. And I've had women that I interviewed, it took years to get a PCOS diagnosis. And their like cysts were bursting, going to the
Um,
emergency room and like completely in pain. And not only that, they're going to the emergency room for a cyst that had just burst. They're in a tremendous amount of pain, not feeling heard, and still turning around and going to work the next day.
yeah. Wow. I know I had cysts like recurring when I was younger, and I think I was 18, and I had one burst, and that's just never not a pleasant experience. And I remember
Yeah.
going into the gynecologist afterwards to be like, "What happened?" And it's like, "Oh, you probably just had a cyst. It's fine." Just the dismissal, like, "Oh, that happens all the time. It's no big deal." And I'm like, "Well, that was awful. What are you talking about?"
It was a big deal to me. And
Right.
another woman I interviewed, she suffered from endometriosis for so many years. And there were some cultural factors in there, in that in her culture, they didn't really talk openly about sex or their period. And there
Mhm.
was this assumption that if you were visiting a gynecologist before you were married, you were sexually active. And so if you were sexually active as a teenager, that was going to bring dishonor to the family. So if
Wow.
you had heavy periods and you probably needed to have your reproductive organs examined even at a young age, it just wasn't going to happen. And so she suffered in pain for years and years and years. And then she did get married. She had passed out from the amount of blood she was losing. She became anemic. She was passing large clots. Just that's a life. It's not a life. And she was on her period for many days out of the month. And by the
Mhm.
time her husband rushed her to the emergency room, because she basically passed out from the pain and the amount of blood she was losing, the doctor had told her that she needed a hysterectomy that her endometriosis was so bad and she had been living in pain so much. And she had to go through that grieving process. She wanted to become a mother, but the endometriosis and not being able to seek proper care and being in an environment safe enough to have that conversation was eye-opening to me as well.
Mhm. If a physician reads your book, what's the one thing you want them to walk away with?
Empathy and
Mhm.
compassion. I think I'm teaching a narrative medicine course to high school students for the first time, and they are working on what is called a braided essay. And my students had to find a healthcare issue. And with the
Mhm.
braided essay, it's a braid. You take like three, I made it my own, but you're like taking three subjects that may not seem like they go together, and you braid them and you weave them in to where they make sense. And so with my students' braided essay, they begin with a narrative of a patient.
Mhm.
And then the next weave is the peer-reviewed article to support what the patient has gone through. And then they go back to the patient, and then they go back to the evidence base, and then they have a conclusion where it's a call to action. So I'm trying to paint this picture for my students that lived experience and storytelling goes along with evidence-based and science-based practice. You
Mhm.
can't have one without the other. And we talk a lot about removing patient shame and getting to the story and getting to the root. And you can't do that if patients don't feel comfortable talking to you.
Right.
And that's what I'm teaching teenagers right now. And it's a type of certificate I'm hoping to build at my institution, is understanding the power of storytelling. And there are fabulous doctors out there who understand empathy and compassion. But you also have, I think, doctors who may be great at the science portion of it,
Mhm.
but really struggle with the humanity side of it. And that's what my book is about, is giving doctors strategies to remove patient shame so you can
Mhm.
actually be in a position to treat the patient.
Right. I guess going back to the process for writing the book, when did it shift from I'm going to write this to I have to write this? Like, what was the driving factor that made you go for it?
I thought about this process in 2020. So at that moment, I had a 4-year-old and a
Mhm.
6-month-old, and I was Mother Nature gave us all a timeout. So we're
Mhm.
in quarantine, there's nowhere to go. And women were approaching me because I was open about my miscarriage and my infertility and
Mhm.
the pain that came with that, which in some ways was still taboo, but it was becoming less taboo. So women were privately messaging me on my Facebook, or they would meet me in public and they would talk about their stories. So I started flirting with this idea of writing a book about different women's stories. During COVID, I spoke to family members, I spoke to close friends, like, hey, I have an idea for this book. And they said they loved it. They loved the idea of just having this book that's not really academic. I mean, there's academic journals in it, but it's narrative nonfiction. This is a book I wanted it to be accessible for most women
Mhm.
and not continuously looking up conditions and legal jargon and medical jargon. Like, we're getting to the stories. And so I wrote one story. I wrote another story. I started seeking out help with publishers of like what they were looking for. And they were adamant that I needed diversity.
Mhm.
And so it took me it'll be published next month. And by the time it's published, it'll be almost a 6-year process. And it
Wow.
took me a couple years to find women. And I did that through social media, through acquaintances,
Mhm.
um, and getting a diverse group of women,
Mhm.
and trying to create interviews where women would be comfortable enough to talk to me because in hindsight, I'm a complete stranger, and especially
Mhm.
women from marginalized groups. And so I made that into a TED Talk as well. I was able to get these women to trust me in these interviews and I'm a writer. So what can a doctor use from a
Mhm.
writer to get women to feel comfortable enough to talk to them?
Mhm.
And so not every woman made my book. So after like the first couple of rounds, editors, we had to really streamline these women's stories and their themes. But just
Mhm.
because they didn't make the book, I will probably put them on my blog, but I have another book in mind. So
Mhm.
these stories are still going to be utilized. It just, they didn't make this specific book. But it was important to me to have most American women see themselves. So I had women from New York City and from rural Texas and so Idaho and California. I had red states and blue states, and we talked about how I talk about how certain laws were able to help certain women in these specific states and how certain policies impacted
Mhm.
women's health in other states. But I really want women to see the commonality of all of us, that we are still women and we're still encountering similar issues. And so, yeah, it was like after the first couple of chapters, this needs to happen. And there were many nights where I'm like up at 3 a.m. and I just felt like this was never going to happen. This book
Mhm.
isn't, because like this has been 6 years. And
Right.
but but these women trusted me with their stories, and so I can't fail. That's how I kept saying it, is I can't fail. They want their story heard. For many women, they've never told their stories. And
Mhm.
some women are under a pseudonym, and I had to
Mhm.
change their geographic location because I needed to respect their privacy, but the story is still true. It's just their name
Mhm.
and maybe their geographic location is not true. But they wanted an outlet. They wanted to feel like their voices mattered. And so that kept me going, was they trusted me with their stories. They want they've never told their story, and they want it out in the public because they don't want other women to go through what they're going through, or they want it to be a source of hope for if a woman
Right.
has been going through something similar.
I agree. There's so many ways in which the world lets women down in policy wise, and there's so many avenues where that's true. And I love that you kind of put that in with the this with how am I trying to say this? With mythology as the angle there. How, because mythology has always been a way culture explains what they fear or what they don't understand about the universe or the human body. So do you think medical misogyny is partly a mythology problem too? So we inherited these stories about women's bodies and medicine that it's just dressed up in, clinical language and has been passed down to kind of push that misogyny.
Oh, 100%. And I think if we know the story of Medusa, that's thousands of years old and we're
Mhm.
still facing it. You would think as we're progressing as a society, we would do better.
Right.
And not only that, like look how we're treating Black women in the medical
Right.
field and the statistics in that. And I talk about that history in my book as well, because there's a woman I interviewed, her name's Heather, and she had an unintended pregnancy at 20 years old. And with her first pregnancy, she had a C-section. And I remember
Mhm.
interviewing her and asking, I'm like, did you want a C-section? And she goes, I don't remember. She goes, you're 20 years old. You automatically trust your medical team to make the decisions for
Right.
you. I just assumed, yeah, I need a C-section. And so whether her situation was an emergency or not, I mean, that was lost in the past, but it was a great opportunity to talk about how Black women are more likely to be pressured into having a C-section and then their pain dismissed afterwards, and how that's
Mhm.
still tied to how the Black woman is perceived from the past with slavery. Because there was a gynecologist who owned slaves that practiced C-sections without anesthesia on them, and how that
Right.
continues on in the field of medicine.
Mhm. And it's interesting that even with a lot of clinical terms and language, they're derived from mythology.
Yes,
Like, yeah.
mythology and history and even the C-section, cesarean, that's even
Mhm.
laced in ancient times. Just the way that we continue to see women thousands of years later. And I think it's time for us to do better.
I agree. And ancient medicine and mythology have really been intertwined forever with priests and gods and remedies. It's something that has always gone hand in hand. And I think we try to separate it now, like it's different, but we haven't done a great job all the way separating those two
Oh,
items.
no. And not even mythology with medicine, folk, what I call folk medicine is still,
Hmm.
and if
Yeah.
you look at this, the root of folk medicine, why it's still popular is there's a connection there. There may not be science to back it up, but there's this trust and connection that keeps it going.
Mhm. You frame narrative medicine as the transformative practice of using storytelling to heal women's bodies. What does that actually look like in practice?
Giving women a safe place to tell their stories and to tell their stories about their bodies. Because how often do we go to the doctor, whether it's a routine checkup, you're feeling under the weather, or even a regular like your yearly pap smear, and the nurse or the doctor, and I get it, they don't have a finite amount of time, but I know, and even when I was giving birth, I was a checklist.
Hmm.
I'm a checklist. And I remember when I was going into labor with my first daughter, my nurse jokingly told me, she goes, "You will probably give birth before we get through this checklist."
Wow.
Like, she was aware of it. But what's the story behind the checklist?
Right.
Like, there's a human being there. And that's what I want doctors to understand, is when they're asking your height and your weight and your blood pressure and your vitals, you're more than that. I
Hmm.
remember in a conversation with a coworker just a year ago, and her gynecologist was retiring and she needed to find one, and she was struggling to find one because we're in a rural area and we're losing providers.
Hmm.
And she goes, "I know what my medical chart says." And she goes, "And I feel like no doctor's going to pick me up because of my medical chart." She goes, "I
Wow.
want to write my narrative and put it in my medical chart and explain my medical chart to whatever provider may pick me up."
Wow. It's so sad. Well, so what do you want a woman who's been dismissed by a doctor to feel after reading your book?
I want them to feel heard. I
Hmm.
want them to feel visible, like you, because I feel like when we go to the doctor and we're dismissed, I feel like we're almost they're gaslighting us, like this is a mental problem instead of a physical problem, or that's how I feel. I mean, I can't speak for other women, but it's
Hmm.
almost like you're not in pain. So instead
Right.
of questioning the doctor, you start questioning yourself, like, am I in pain? Am I imagining this? And the
Hmm.
answer is, you are in pain.
Hmm.
And you deserve to feel heard and to feel visible. And I want them to feel inspired, and that they're not alone. Their pain is real. Actually, I have an appendix in my book about how to find providers that are trained in trauma. So
Hmm.
trauma care is now becoming, I don't even want to call it a trend because I feel like it's something that needed to be done. But I
Right.
provide a list of resources for women, whether they're going for infertility, gone through pregnancy loss, gone through sexual assault, domestic violence. But I also include tips and tricks on how to find a provider that is trained in trauma. So
Hmm.
that way they're trained to listen to you and create a safe space. And there are 6 core principles, and I include that in my appendix as well. So I'm hoping to educate women and empower women to gain control over their voices and their stories when they go to the doctor.
I love that. We've covered a lot, but is there anything else we haven't covered that you want to mention from the book or your experiences overall?
I don't think so. I'm excited and nervous to get it out because like it's been mine for 6 years and it's about ready to go public. So now I'm like, oh no, don't judge these women too harshly.
No, I'm sure it'll come with a lot of support. I feel like the right people will read it and it will just provide support and confidence too. Something that I think some people I think will very much need to read it.
And that's my hope. That's my hope.
And what do you have an exact release date?
July 20th.
Okay, perfect. And
Yeah,
will it
it's
be,
coincide with the Seneca Falls Convention.
and where can people pick up a copy?
Barnes and Noble, and directly with my publisher, which is Ozark Hollow Press, and it's available on ebook on Amazon.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Kayla, for joining us today. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you so much.
Of course. And until next time, everybody, stay weird.